The New Testament. It's probably one of the most important, most influential books in all of human history. But, have you ever really stopped and asked yourself, who decided what goes in it? Who actually picked the books? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into today.
You know, the popular idea sounds like something out of a thriller novel, right? Some secret council, maybe a powerful emperor, all gathered in a shadowy, smoke-filled room, handpicking texts to control the masses. It makes for a great story. But the truth? Well, the truth is way more interesting and a whole lot less conspiratorial.
And here's the thing that surprises most people. For the first few centuries after Jesus, there was no single officially stamped New Testament. Not at all. Early Christians had a whole bunch of writings they considered sacred. So, how did we get from that loose collection to the book we all have on our shelves today? To get our heads around this, we have to try and put ourselves in the shoes of a Christian back in, say, the 2nd century. They didn't have a single book called the Bible. So what on earth did they have, and how did they know what to believe?
Well, first off, they had the Jewish scriptures, what we now call the Old Testament. And then they had this growing library of their own texts, letters from apostles like Paul and Peter, and these incredible stories about Jesus' life, the Gospels. These were copied by hand, passed from church to church, and they gained their authority from the ground up organically.
Okay, this brings us to a really important word, canonization. The word canon actually comes from the Greek word canon, which means a measuring stick. And that's the perfect way to think about it. The whole process wasn't about a council making a book holy. It was about them recognizing which books already measured up as a standard for Christian belief. So you could almost think of it like an unofficial bestseller list. Long before any councils got together, local churches and communities were already using a pretty consistent set of tests to figure out which books they could really trust. So what was on this checklist? Well, first was apostolic origin. Big question, was this written by an apostle or someone who was a really close associate, like a direct student of one? They wanted that eyewitness connection. Second, orthodox teaching. Did what it said line up with the core faith about Jesus that had been passed down from the very beginning? And third, widespread use. Was this a book that churches everywhere, from Jerusalem to Rome, were all reading and loving and using in their worship? A text really had to hit all three of those marks to be taken seriously.
For a good long while, this informal grassroots system worked just fine. But then a couple of major events happened that basically forced the church to say, okay, we need to get serious and actually define our list.
The first big catalyst was a guy named Marcion around the year 144. He showed up with his own Bible. He literally took a pair of scissors to the scriptures, tossed out the entire Old Testament, and chopped up the Gospel of Luke and Paul's letters to fit his own views. This was a huge wake-up call. The broader church had to respond by defining which books represented the full story, not just Marcion's edited highlights. The second push was even more intense and, frankly, terrifying. In 303 AD, the Roman Emperor Diocletian unleashed what's known as the Great Persecution, and his orders were brutally simple. Find and burn all Christian scriptures. Suddenly, just owning one of these books was a capital offense.
Just think about that for a second. The soldiers are kicking down doors. You have moments to decide which scrolls you are willing to risk your life and your family's lives for. That kind of pressure has a way of clarifying what you believe is truly essential, doesn't it?
And this is where the famous church councils finally step onto the scene. But their role is so often misunderstood. See, they weren't starting with a blank slate. They were basically putting an official stamp on a consensus that had already been growing for hundreds of years.
Just look at this timeline. The writings are circulating for well over a century. By 200 AD, there's already broad agreement on the core, the Gospels, Paul's letters. But it's not until 367 that we see Bishop Athanasius write a letter with the exact 27 books we have today. And only after that do the councils of Hippo and Carthage meet. They were the finish line, not the starting blocks.
And what's so fascinating is that these councils were actually pretty practical regional meetings in North Africa. Their main job wasn't to decree something new for the whole world. It was to solve a local administrative problem. Hey, what books are officially approved to be read out loud when we all get together for worship? They were just formalizing what was already being done. This quote from the theologian Roger Nicole just nails it. He says, a speedometer registers the speed of your car. It doesn't cause it. In the same way, the church councils didn't cause the books to be scripture. They simply recognized and registered the authority these books already had in the life of the church. So, all of this history really boils down to one massive question, one that people still debate today. What was really going on here?
Was the canon an act of recognition or an act of invention? In other words, did the church simply discover the books that were already inspired and authoritative? Or did the church, as an institution, use its power to invent the canon by choosing which books would get its stamp of approval? Now, based on everything we've looked at, the historical evidence really does point overwhelmingly in one direction: recognition. This was a bottom-up, organic process that unfolded over centuries. It wasn't a top-down decision made in a single moment. You could even say the church didn't create the canon. The canon created the church.
But that still leaves us with this incredible question to wrestle with. So was the final list a product of messy human history, or was it guided by divine providence? Or is it somehow both? And how you answer that, well, it shapes everything about how you see the Bible. So what about you? After hearing all this, where do you land on the spectrum? Was it more about recognition or selection? Jump into the comments below. I genuinely love to hear your take on this.
And hey, if this kind of deep dive is your thing, make sure you subscribe, because our next explainer is a fascinating one. We're looking at a book that was massively popular in the early church, but didn't quite make the final cut: the Book of Enoch. We're going to ask, did the apostles themselves actually treat it like scripture?